Hi, my name is Eva Steiner and this is my project Psychotherapists Around the Globe. I am interviewing the psychotherapists around the world and asking them the same 8 questions. I am wondering how mental health profession is in their country. Today we are going to...
Thank you for taking this time for doing this interview with me. Before we start, can you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the invite as well. I'm really excited to be here and have this interview with you. My name is Nicole Hodja. I am a psychotherapist, what we call in Vienna still in training under supervision, but very soon on the way to become fully licensed. I am originally from Tirana, Albania, but I've been living, studying, and working in Austria now since 2015, so almost 10 years. My training is in psychoanalysis.
Let's go to the first question. Tell me a little bit about your culture. What is some holiday or tradition that your country celebrates? And if your culture would be an emotion, what emotion would it be?
I think it would be fair to make a disclaimer here, like we also agreed beforehand. As I said, I come from Albania, but for this interview, I am representing Austria, so to say. So I will, to the best of my abilities, try to give as much as I can an unbiased or an observer opinion. I would say, from what I've observed, working here, living here for the last 10 years, and obviously also knowing locals, I think the holiday that mostly represents Austria would be Christmas. Maybe to explain a little bit on that. I remember I watched once a stand-up comedy, and the person on stage asked randomly one of the audience members, and it turns out that this person was an Austrian woman. And he said, the stand-up comedian said, "Really? So what about Austria? What is Austria famous for?" And of course, in the worst case scenario, what you think of is what happened during the Second World War. But she answered it in such an honest and genuine way that actually made me look at this differently. And she said, well, Austria is famous for Christmas. This is Austria's contribution to the world. And I think it's okay and it's time to also look at it this way. And I was thinking about the symbolism behind Christmas. It's a time when we all get together. It's family time. It's a time when there are more or less no grievances. So it's really about togetherness and no discrimination, if you were to put it in those terms. And I think Austria really shows it. I can more specifically talk about Vienna. Vienna is a very multicultural city. There's a lot of different neighborhoods where you see, oh yeah, this is where a certain group resides mostly, or if you want, let's say, a certain food, then you go to this district. For example, the district where I work right now is the 7, and that is, in lay terms, the hipster district. So you can go downstairs and you see a mixture of shops, of cafes, of shops that you wouldn't even think would be there. For example, there's a shop that makes hats when you go down the street. Then there's a pottery shop right after it. There's like 3 photography shops on the same street. So it really comes together. And this is why I think also Christmas would represent it. Not only that, we also have these famous Christmas markets where you really see that people come together and enjoy themselves.
And if the country would be an emotion?
This is the question where I also got stuck with a little bit. Because when I brought up that the country celebration would be Christmas, I also thought in the same sentence, just like I mentioned in the beginning, we think of what happened during the Second World War. So I couldn't really choose an emotion, but I thought it's something that it's still very conflicting. I would say maybe some part of the population, and perhaps I feel it or I see it, again, this is a biased perspective, I still see that they are, as a nation, a little bit conflicted about this. There is guilt and there is trying to compensate for this guilt of what happened so many years ago. We just had an election where, let's say, the right-wing party was declared victorious, and you could really see the sentiment on the streets, people talking about it, how they were unhappy with it, maybe in a psychoanalytic sense, fearing, are we regressing? Are we going back? And I also, when I see, for example, young Austrian clients, for some reason, it is still very instilled in them, this sense of guilt. I see that there is a big wave or a big tendency towards being conscious, being respectful of one another, from these small things going thrift shopping, being sustainable, trying to be accepting, helping each other out. And even though I'm very happy to hear about this and to see that the younger generations, I think, are doing a really good job at embracing this living together, maybe because of Austria's past, this is more emphasized here. So in terms of emotion, I do not want to give it guilt or compensating for guilt, but I would say maybe somewhere a word that would describe being in transition. Let's say trying to do something differently. Maybe being in movement would be a better image for this.
How did you become a psychotherapist and what is your therapeutic approach?
So straight after high school, I knew that I was going to come to Vienna to study because somehow this was my calling, if we want to explain it like that. I noticed from a very young age, maybe 13, 14, that friends would come to me, they would share with me their secrets, and I would be really good at keeping them. Eventually, maybe even a business-oriented mind, I thought, well, maybe I could make this for a living. And so I decided to give it a try. And actually, with 15, my father and I, we traveled to Vienna, actually to the Sigmund Freud University. And there I was introduced to what this university did, what it offered. And there, finally, I could see the distinction between a psychologist and a psychotherapist. And I thought, all right, then psychotherapy is for me. And already back then, I went with the idea that I wanted to pursue psychoanalysis from the little readings that I had done online already. So it happened. With 18, I came to Vienna. I started studying there, and Austria has quite a difficult licensing process and a long one. But I think through this university, I was able to really stay on track, and they were able to guide me accordingly, and also other international students. The way it works here is that we have this first process called the propedeuticum, and that means that you do, let's say, a general training or education in psychotherapy science, and you also need to do, I think they must be around 500 or 600 internship hours, which the university clinic provides a space for. And then the third year of the bachelor, so this would have been the first 2 years, in the third year of the bachelor, if you are over 24, you already apply to the ministry for the second process called the Fachspezifika. And that is where you choose your modality. If you are under 24, you can go ahead anyway with the program, but you don't apply to the ministry yet. And now I think there is a change in law where I have not clarified yet, because I keep hearing conflicting opinions, where now you perhaps only need to apply for the propedeuticum if you have an IB diploma, and you don't need to go through with the second one, with the Fachspezifika. But don't quote me on that. There has been some changes since April this year, and I think people are free to choose what process or what model they will follow. But I was with the old one. So the third year of my bachelor, I started and I chose psychoanalysis, and that's what I was training in. And already in this third year, we are supposed to do, again, around 500 or 600 hours, where 150 of these hours need to be in a psychiatric setting. And that's what I did in Tirana, in Albania, in the general psychiatric hospital, in the pediatric department. So that's where I spent I think around 150 hours exactly for that purpose. Afterwards, you have the master's program, which technically is part of the Fachspezifika, or back when I did it, this is how it was considered. And during this Fachspezifika is where you actually start to see clients. So that's where you have to do a minimum of 600 hours of client hours. So as you see, from the first day on, we were really thrown in there, and we were in contact with clients. In 2015, when I started, there was also the Syrian immigration wave. So I think we really saw a lot, which perhaps one could say, well, how can an 18 or 19-year-old deal with this? But I think we had a big support system, which was the university, our professors, other people around. There was really a climate where we could talk openly, where we could ask for support. There was obligatory observation hours, supervision hours, self-awareness groups. So I think in all sides we were really contained. And there was obviously always at least 2 licensed psychotherapists at all times with us that we could go to if the situation would become. I think this is and was an essential part of my training to become a psychotherapist. This already hands-on experience. You basically work for 5 years and then you start to see clients. And I think this is invaluable.
And is Sigmund Freud the only university in Austria where you can study psychotherapy?
As far as I know, yes. However, there will be a new law starting from 2026, where the public University of Vienna will also offer psychotherapy courses. They are still working on the curriculum and what they will involve, but now it's possible. Or in the future, it will be possible. Until now, the way one could become a psychotherapist was to either study psychology, again at the public University of Vienna, or to have another training or education, and the ministry gives you a list of those, and that could be a social worker, a teacher, a nurse. So again, something adjacent to the profession. Some of those subjects are already accredited, and after you do this propedeuticum, so general education in one of these centers that you choose to go to, where you pay privately, that's how you can take your psychotherapeutic certificate. That's where this would be different, whereas the Sigmund Freud University offers you a diploma.
Is there a law for psychotherapy? Because you are talking about the law, so I am assuming that there is a law, but I want to confirm.
There is a law, of course, and it's very strict. So all these steps that I mentioned in order to become a psychotherapist are a part of the law. These 2 applications to the propedeuticum and the fachspezifikuum, both of these go to the ministry. And there they are approved, and there they say, good, now you can go into the next phase. And there is still a law that it's been 10 years that they talk about changing it. This law has been in power since, I think, 1991, if I remember correctly, which states that one can start seeing clients only after the age of 24. So this is when you can become what you call a psychotherapist in training under supervision. And this also means that you have to have 1 unit or 1 hour of supervision per 4 hours of clients that you see. So from 24, and then you can do this until you are 28. And with 28, you are given the permission to apply again to the ministry to become fully licensed. And with fully licensed, of course, there are other criteria you need to fulfill, and those are still supervision, but there you add, I think, attending conferences, making sure that your training is up to date, and so on and so on.
If I turn to clients, so how does client get psychotherapeutic help? Do they need to pay privately, or they are going through public health insurance system?
There are a few ways, of course. For example, I can talk from experience of the Sigmund Freud Clinic. They handle themselves, or they organize it like a charity, meaning that clients pay according to their income. So you can have therapy for as low as €20 a session. And this is where, let's say, beginner therapists start. There's also the public insurance. Depending on the insurance that you have, you receive a certain amount of money back from the session. However, these are more cost-effective if the psychotherapist is also a medical doctor. So the way it's been explained to me is that they have a stronger lobby, so they were able to make these contracts with insurances where clients can get more money back if their therapist is also a medical doctor. But if a therapist is just a therapist, then basically the amount compensated varies from 30 to 40 euro a session of compensation. Now, you cannot work with public insurances if you are still in training under supervision. And this is where, for example, therapists in training under supervision still have to give their prices a little bit lower than fully licensed ones. But, for example, there's the option of private insurances, which doesn't discriminate. whether you are in training or fully licensed, depending on the package that you have, they will cover part or fully for psychotherapy. So I think once you are in the profession and you start looking around and people come to you and you have to look at these different forms, you can find a way to make a very good living.
How society looks upon psychotherapy or any psychological help?
So far, my experience, let's say even with older individuals, has been overwhelmingly positive. Sometimes I really wonder when my colleagues come to me and we discuss and they say, oh, I had to deal with someone, let's say that I met at an event and they really don't believe in psychotherapy. I somehow found myself being there having to protect or defend psychotherapy. And I think, well, so far I haven't had this experience. Maybe one day I will. But it's been, on the most part, overwhelmingly positive, as I said. I think Vienna, I cannot speak perhaps about other cities, but I think Vienna is quite open to it. And I see that it has become a part of the everyday dialogue. Perhaps the pandemic helped with it a lot. And I think it speaks volumes on this movement. So when we said what emotion would Austria be, I think this is what it represents, that instead of shunning therapists away or mental health professionals, they said, okay, let's talk about it. And I think also in overall literature, we saw an increase in COVID-related topics and if therapists experience fatigue. So we weren't only looking at clients and pathologizing them, but we were also taking care of ourselves and introducing ourselves into the conversation. And in my experience, I think we were received very well by the general public. Of course, I cannot deny that there are people who do not fully agree with it. But as I said, I can only speak from my experience.
And what would that doubt be regarding the psychotherapy or stigma be?
Mostly what I hear, for example, would come from my clients or maybe some of their parents or relatives or whoever it is. And they say things like, oh, well, it's not that you have anything wrong with you or that you are mentally ill, you're just not sleeping enough, you're not working enough, or you need to find a hobby, or you just need to not think about it. So somehow like a straight denial of this. Or maybe also the previous stigma that if you have really severe problems, you are considered, by using these terms, crazy or incapable or a lunatic or I don't know what, only then you should go to a therapist, and a therapist only deals with these cases. I rarely hear this, to be honest, unless it is indirectly, as I said, from clients who it comes up sometimes.
What is your society teaching about child-parent relationship, and whether these values of society also influence how you design your interventions as a therapist?
This was also a very interesting question to think about. I remember when I had just opened my private practice or starting to work privately with clients, I had and I still have a mentor who had been doing this a lot longer than I. And she was telling me about certain books that she read that I think were published in the 50s or 60s in Austria, so by Austrian authors, on how to raise children. And basically what this book said was, which now would be considered unfathomable and unethical, but it really pushed kids repressing their emotions, using phrases like, why are you crying? That is ridiculous. You should be quiet, right? Children should not be seen or heard. And I think this generation, so let's say the 70s and 80s, you can see the influence of that in the society. And maybe because I deal with Austrian people, but I also deal with international people. And I have to say, so far, the Austrian people that I've seen are of the younger generation. So maybe this is where this positive experience comes from, in saying that they're actually very open to it. But if you hear what they say about their parents or maybe teachers at school when they were raised, you still get that feeling that, oh, it is true and it is coming from somewhere and they were really influenced by this way of thinking. So to put it all together again with this movement, this is where I think there is a big movement. Of course, it took a few generations to get here, but if they were able to do it, and we're looking at, I think, a very modern, progressive society, that, okay, they still like to keep their values, but at the end of the day, we all have our own moral and ethical compass, as long as, of course, we don't take the liberties away from others. I think in total, it is a good balance.
And if an adult client would come to you and say, I don't want to see my parents anymore, I want to cut contact, how would society look upon such a request, and how would you approach as a therapist?
I think, at least in Austria, this would be more acceptable. And I think because of the way child rearing was seen, let's say in the 50s and 60s, like I mentioned, I really wonder if this would have an effect, or at least at first sight. And if it would have an effect, I mean, if they would even accept that this affects them. Because even though they are open, they want to talk about it, there is still perhaps this guilt. And maybe this is the difficult part to address. I think they go through quite a big turmoil, of course, just like anyone, in order to make such a decision. But I wouldn't say that it is uncommon. What I see mostly happening is that they develop some kind of a distance, they become independent very early, and they move out, let's say, of the home, of the city they lived in, for example, and they move out to Vienna. And this is their way of dealing with it. So I think they also have quite a good social and welfare system, which also helps them out while they are still young. So, for example, Austrian students, if they decide to study, they receive a monthly allowance. Maybe they can do a part-time job on the side. So they are more or less supported, even if the parents aren't able to do so. How I approach this in therapy, I would say exactly this, that we try to bring these two parts together. So what part of it is I am doing this out of anger to punish my parent and to really show them how hurt I am? And what part of me is it, well, maybe this is best for me. And this doesn't have a lot to do with my parents right now. Maybe it did in the past, and we can deal with that. But to try and make this decision authentically come from yourself. So in psychoanalytic terms, we head towards an integration of the self.
What are the learned beliefs regarding client-therapist relationship, and can the relationship continue outside the therapy once the therapy process is over?
Even here, I've had quite a few experiences, for example, with people who have never been to therapy before. And that's where you take on the position of a teacher a little bit. And at the same time, together, you develop what this relationship looks like. Austrian people, maybe also because of their culture, are anyway interested in keeping that politeness, in keeping that distance proper. So I think it is not so difficult to already have a certain implied setting when you work with them. In German, there is this distinction that it is not in English between the formal and informal you. So right away, there is that hierarchy. Maybe so far, because of the people I've worked with, they already come with the trust that you are a professional and they can rely on the system that trained and educated you.
After you finish therapy with the client, I mean the whole process, can you have the relationship with the client, like a friendship or even romantic relationship, or not? What is the law saying here?
Also here, I don't remember exactly, but I think the law states when the therapeutic process is completed, you can start a friendship or a relationship with the client 2 years or 3 years after this has been completed. That, in my eyes, is still very early for everything to really have been finished. Anyway, there are different cases. I cannot generalize, but I strongly believe that to pursue a kind of friendship or a relationship with the client, even when they are no longer your clients, would be a no-go for me. Perhaps this is where I personally also match with this Austrian tendency to keep things polite and harmonious and proper, so to say. And I think personally, I take a lot of pride and strength and really happiness that I am able to provide this setting for them. And I'm okay with remaining this psychotherapist who is just a psychotherapist to them, and nothing more. And maybe they can see me on the street or whatever, but to know that, okay, that was my therapist, or that is my therapist. And although I might see her sometimes in sweatpants or an attire that I'm not usually used to seeing her, that was just a glimpse into maybe what her Wednesday morning looked like. But otherwise, I prefer to keep these very delicate processes the way they are in therapy, and even when therapy is over, to keep it like that.
And in case of the abuse, so the therapy is the one crossing the line, where the client can turn to? Is there any organization, any procedure?
These things are also taken very seriously. And of course, the client can turn into some institutions where any psychotherapist who is practicing privately has to be registered with, or they can go straight away to the ministry. And they can file an official complaint, and then there is some kind of committee or a hearing where they discuss what exactly happened. From what I've heard, most of the times the ministry or this committee tries to keep or to be more lenient on the therapist side. When there are these misunderstandings that you cannot really prove, or the protocol hasn't been done the right way from the therapist side, and you're really wondering, okay, this is very blurry. But in really extreme cases where, for example, there was abuse, there was physical contact, there was sexual contact, I think there is no doubt there you absolutely lose your license, and nothing more, I think, can be done to it. I am not sure if perhaps there is like a waiting period that maybe after a while you can get it back. But I don't hear of these cases very frequently, which is why I'm also not informed about them as well.
Is supervision a must for a therapist in your country?
It absolutely is. From the time that you are studying and you are doing this internship hours in clinic, first as an assistant, then as a psychotherapist. As a psychotherapist, between 24 and 28, when you have just started, even if you are in your 40s or 50s. Anyway, during this period that is called in training under supervision, so supervision is the emphasis here, you are a fully working psychotherapist who per 4 hours of clients, you have to have 1 hour of supervision. So if you see 8 clients a week, that's 8 hours. That week, you need to have 2 hours of supervision. Of course, realistically speaking, it's not always possible time-wise that you are able to do this, especially if you see more clients than that. But at the end of this process, between 24 and 28 years old, numbers align so that this is possible. And it could be that sometimes you have more supervision or less, let's say during the holiday period, but it's an absolute must, not only during this training period, but also afterwards when you are fully licensed. And when you are fully licensed, this is why I'm also unsure, because the law is changing there as well. So it used to be that you had, let's say, a control by the ministry every 2 years where you had to apply. These are the supervision hours, this is the invoice, these are the conferences I attended, these are the trainings I did. But now I think it's been extended to 5 years. And they say, well, a percentage of this needs to be supervision, a percentage of that needs to be trainings, and so on. So they keep a very strict eye that we are constantly under supervision.
What are the most common complaints that the clients come to therapy for?
I would say, especially with the younger individuals, there is some kind of, I wouldn't say identity crisis per se, but a wish to know more about oneself. And I say this very often, especially with students, but this applies also, let's say, to 25, 26, 27-year-olds. I tell them that, we are not fair to you, younger people. So as a society, or what we expect out of you, because we tell you that you need to go to university, you need to get an education, but in a way it's a little bit psychotic if you think about it. You are working hard towards what? You don't know if you're going to get a good job afterwards. You don't know if you're going to stay in the same field, but you're told to hold on and believe that it's gonna be rewarded one day. So this is how I try to approach this topic of identity, that they are still growing. I don't know if this is specifically only psychoanalytic theories or also general literature, but I try to reassure them that they develop until the age of 28 years old. And of course, they will have doubts, fears. They might not recognize themselves one day, and it's fully okay. And of course, in the middle of all of this, there is anxiety, there is some depression, there is some, we can say, personality structures that are disorganized, or if we can even use the word disorder. In that sense, especially with younger ones, I am really relaxed and laid back, and I think support and giving them this information that it will get better, but I hear you, is quite necessary. And then when it comes to, let's say, older people, I think it's just patterns that are appearing in their family life or at work that have already been there for a long time, actually. As a psychoanalyst, of course, this is my biased perspective, that a lot of things that happen in childhood affect us as we grow older. But this is also how I work. You try to figure out these patterns, you get a deeper knowledge of yourself, and these symptoms are not just symptoms that can be removed, but they are trying to tell you something, and it's better to listen. And the moment you listen, that's when change starts to happen.
One more question. You are mentioning it throughout this interview, but I will ask anyways. Is there any generational trauma that you are witnessing?
Like I mentioned, there is this big historical event that we are all aware of during the Second World War. Afterwards, perhaps as a reaction to that, maybe there was this way of bringing up children, which was to be quiet, to not talk, to not cry, to not express emotions. And only recently, I think there is a shift with that. So maybe the big generational trauma would be exactly this guilt. And maybe this is the first time that this generation, or let's say this last two generations, are really addressing it. Where there is guilt, I say frequently, there is also aggression. And I think they are using this aggression for the better. So one of my supervisors mentioned once in supervision, and it really stuck with me, how in Latin, aggredere, so aggression, means to go forward. And I think this is what Austrians or the younger generations are doing. So instead of using it to have this senseless discrimination and racism issues and misogynistic issues, they are really using it to come together and to try to be kinder to one another. This is where I think this shift is, and I'm very positive about it. Perhaps it might come across as if I am this bubbly person or who believes so much in this kind of things, that things will get better. But in the last 10 years, I have allowed myself to see it. And personally, I am actually, I would say, quite a realistic person, in the sense that I will believe it once I see it. But here I can allow myself to already see what's going on. And that's why I constantly say I am very optimistic about what's coming and about what's already here.
If you would share one tool, belief, or approach that is a must-have for you as a therapist, what would that be?
I think I also discovered this one very recently within myself and in my practice. And that is to actually be human and to allow yourself to be there with your client. There is a wish in me to maintain and uphold this psychoanalytic figure, this therapist who is just a therapist, and you project on them whatever you want. And at the end of the day, you finish your session, you go home, and let's say you are not so preoccupied with them. But I think ever since I became more confident in the technique, I gained a lot more experience, and then I could navigate the sessions and different clients more easily. That's where somehow I started allowing myself to be more personal, to disclose a little bit more. And in psychoanalytic terms, to disclose a bit more means you can tell them where you are going on holiday if they ask. So, or even starting to say bless you when they sneeze, because you couldn't do that, right? You have to maintain your composure, and you have to maintain the setting. So I think ever since I started doing that, of course, while at the same time really keeping in check my countertransference, meaning why do I feel the need or the urge to comfort this client right now, or to say something, or to want to share my experience with them, or to want to make them feel better right away. Of course, you combine that with, but maybe a little bit of that is necessary. And anyway, we will address and we will explore where this is coming from. But be more in contact, in authentic contact with them in the moment. And this is where therapy is experienced. And that's where this experience happens. Maybe one could say this is very demanding, but I think after developing in such a strict and ethical way for a long time, and then you open up, then I wouldn't say so. So it's not that I finish my hours and then I am dead for the rest of the day. On the contrary, I think that this line of work for me is very fulfilling, it's very rewarding. And at the end of the day, I have my fair share of meaningful interactions throughout the day. And I'm not doing a job where I feel that I'm slaving away and I'm contributing nothing to society. I think it really takes you to be in love with this profession and to want to be with people to do it. Because there are cases when they will call you at 9 in the evening and maybe you wanted to go to sleep or go for a walk, but that knowing that you were there and you made a difference is anyway far more rewarding than that. So these were the disclaimers that we were told when we just started, and if we were okay with them, we had to, or we could keep going. So I am very satisfied with my choices, and I see myself doing this for the rest of my life, actually.